It's such an honor and a pleasure to be here with you this morning. And it is a great honor and a pleasure to introduce Dr. Neal Lester from Arizona State University. He is a foundation professor of English and the founding director of the most amazing Project Humanities at Arizona State University. A scholar of African American literature and culture studies, Dr. Lester researches and teaches subjects ranging from African American children's literature, American popular culture, everyday lessons in privilege and bias, cultural appropriation, the race and gender politics of hair, Black and white interracial intimacies, and women writers. His pioneering work on the N-word is nationally and internationally recognized. An award-winning teacher and community citizen, Dr. Lester is currently completing an edited volume on global social justice to be published by the Modern Language Association. He is a leading professional humanities scholar, and he has been asked to be a guest editor of the special issue on African American children's literature for the International Journal of Humanities. And he is looking at turning his substantial essay on violence against Black children into a book project. His Project Humanities initiative brings individuals and communities together to talk, listen, connect, has garnered so much local and national accolades as a community intervention existing at the nexus of diversity, equity, justice, and humanity that he has made a complete fan out of me. I had an opportunity to see Dr. Lester share his initial work on the N-word back in 2012 and have been following him ever since. So it is such an honor and a pleasure to be in this space with you all, and of course, Dr. Lester. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellie. I am a fan from way back. I appreciate you and all the work that I have seen you do and all the work that you are doing. Good morning, good afternoon, good day, wherever you are. Thank you for this moment. I would like to offer, as part of this presentation, a share, because what teachers do. And I want you to bear with me as I set up here. So, and I want to do three dots. Oh, okay, right. All right, there we go. All right, I want to offer as the title of this little talk this morning, As the World Turns in Search of Social Justice. And I offer as an epigram this by Dr. King from one of my favorite essays. It's not often talked about, thought about, but I would like to make sure that we open this in terms of how I'm framing this. Somewhere we must come to see that social progress never rolls on the heels of inevitability. It comes through the tireless efforts and the persistent work of dedicated individuals. And without this hard work, time itself becomes an ally of the primitive forces of social stagnation. And I see that I'm going to be fighting with this bar. And so we must help time, and we must realize that the time is always right to do right. Large segments of society are more concerned about the tranquility and the status quo than about justice, equality, and humanity. I've divided this into two parts. Part one. While preparing my edited book of essays that Ellie referenced on global social justice in late 2018, I thought I understood the volume's vision and direction. I knew that it needed to be significantly different from the many existing academic volumes that address social justice. I knew that I wasn't necessarily trying to hit upon a single definition of social justice. I also knew that I was less interested in how to teach a text per se, and more interested in exploring how the myriad ideas about social justice become action. I wanted to know about and to showcase examples of what others are doing personally, professionally, organizationally, and communally to affect positive social change toward equality and equity and humanity and the human dignity for all living species. I knew that the model of social justice to which I subscribe as an academic practitioner spans disciplines and crosses disciplinary boundaries. I also knew that what this volume becomes must have diverse representation of thought and appeal to diverse audiences, not just college and university teachers and students. What emerged when I submitted the 19 essay, 500-page manuscript in January of 2021 addresses diverse subjects, audiences, and perspectives. These essays cross boundaries and reinforce my belief that defining justice itself is near impossible because too many of us lack the imagination to move beyond what we have done and what we already know. Despite the many contradictions in Madonna's 1990s Vogue, and you know sometimes I try to sing that, but the critical nonsense that it makes no difference if you're Black or white, or if you're a boy or a girl, and that beauty is where you find it, the song does challenge us all to use our own imaginations because that's what it's for. To imagine a more just world than what we have experienced is to take risk. It's to see the past intricately connected to the present and to see the future as my friend and poet Jenna Schwartz said in a recent Project Humanities workshop on the future is simply the next breath. And speaking of breaths, the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery, and sadly and angrily too many others, sent me into a psychological tailspin as I questioned what I had been doing as a Black faculty member teaching African-American literature and culture in predominantly white spaces and higher education for the past 30 years. I, like so many of us this morning, here on this call are continually asking ourselves this 1970s Marvin Gaye question, what's going on? What's going on? What's going on? Yes, I did manage to crawl out of that deep hole of despair, doubt, and confusion as I had awakened to a new understanding of myself as a Black male in this country who lives, breathes, studies, and teaches social justice. This race-specific unrest boiling over in the streets in the summer of 2020 that once again set cities, properties, and tempers aflame because of decades, actually centuries, of racial, social, and economic injustices entrenched and institutionalized in complex systems of oppression was not unlike the setting and scene that opens James Baldwin's 1964 play, Blues for Mr. Charlie, as mostly young Black protesters prepare to gather in the streets to protest against the murder of Richard, a young Black man, by a respected white man, Lyle, who as a white man in the deeply segregated South meets no legal accountability or consequence. Loosely based on the 1954 tragedy of Emmett Till, Baldwin's play captures both in the stage and set design the almost surreal segregated geographic Black-white living spaces of Black-white communal lived experiences and Black-white communal responses to Black deaths that plagued the US for decades and catalyzed into the US civil rights movement. Baldwin believed then to be too militant light, had a powerful voice of change, but he didn't seem to be loud enough. And he seemed to excuse the white murderers' actions. Baldwin asked his readers and viewers to see American racism as a plague that negatively affects everyone, though differently. And in his notes for Blues, Baldwin strikes a seemingly conciliatory note. He says, "But if it is true, and I believe it is, that all men are brothers, then we have the duty to try to understand this wretched man. And while we cannot hope to liberate him, begin working toward the liberation of his children. For we, the American people, have created him. He is our servant. It is we who have locked him in the prison of his color. It is we who have persuaded him that Negroes are worthless human beings and that it is his sacred duty as a white man to protect and honor the purity of his tribe." Baldwin is clearly onto something about humanity, even amid the most horrific and tragic actions of Black folks' deaths and dying, and is here walking the road less traveled among his contemporaries by calling for an acknowledgement of everybody's humanity. The same was true when activist Angela Y. Davis visited ASU in 2011, just after the murder of Osama bin Laden. And while the nation and the world cheered his death and the cruelty he knowingly inflicted upon other humans, Davis entered that packed audience of over 400 students, faculty, administrators, and community members with this question: What is it about us that allows us to cheer the death of any human being? The packed audience was silenced and challenged to reflect and to self-reflect. And importantly then, the brief final lines of Baldwin's play become for me an affirmation that walking toward justice, however practiced and imagined, is a walk toward each person's humanity. It means walking together in the same direction, but perhaps down different paths that ultimately converge in that illusory horizon that we imagine as life, liberty, and justice for all. The essays in my volume are different lanes of the highway, different paths along the trail toward justice in its many manifestations. It's about the denial of or the affirmation of human life and human dignity. As the US and the world witness this great disruption of the status quo that has resulted in death, power grabs, unchecked privilege, and suffering, I see some protesting in the streets, and others are challenging injustices via their Zoom and their keyboards. I see allies, accomplices, and co-conspirators calling in and calling out family members and colleagues and neighbors and strangers. And I see white people asking, what can I do to advance real change in systems that oppress? I see folks responding with prescribed lists of resources and action items. I see folks reaching across boundaries and communities to support and to chastise. I see folks coming together to talk within and beyond their group memberships. So many see this moment as a storm that destroys in order to rebuild. Perhaps these are indeed the fires next time after the perpetual floods of American injustice. Perhaps this action, this cosmic pause and unrest will indeed lead to living and coexisting in a world where all lives really do matter. My volume and this moment in our US and world history beckon all to join this march toward justice as pronounced through the intentional lens of hope and hopefulness in the Negro national anthem, lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring.
I like this part right here. Come on. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the till victory is won.
So I know that those who are new to racial and social justice work, the move from awareness to acceptance to action is indeed significant. I know that asking others already engaged in this work without doing some of the most basic fundamental work itself by oneself in a truly committed, not just check a box kind of way is absolutely exhausting and discouraging. Here are some of the questions and the comments that interrupt my present. Why are Black people destroying their own communities with looting and vandalism? I am a diverse, and these are from different folks. I am the diversity and inclusion liaison for my community chorus, and I would love to do a presentation on the benefits and reasons why D&I is important. I know that you specialize in a lot of these topics, and I was wondering if you could help me develop a presentation and or present to the chorus around some of your topics. Would you have some availability to discuss some of these topics? Now, I don't mind these questions. It's just the sheer volume of these questions that ask for so much. I also find myself in a position I'm not familiar with. I'm not sure what I can do to help because I no longer wish to assume to know what the best thing to do to help. So I'm reaching out to humbly ask you for some new ideas. Yes, I'm a stranger, but I'm open to your suggestion. And here's a local bar association that asks, I understand and think that we, the State Bar Association Diversity and Inclusion Committee, have great panels for our tragic death at open forum and would love to tell you about them, and also love your advice to help make this a successful event. And then finally, somebody says, we haven't done a lot in this area, so we're hoping you can come in to our television newsroom and talk to our team about race relations for about 45 minutes with maybe 15 minutes for Q&A. I am stunned by these invitations. And I am also stunned when I recognize that these invitations, many of them are asking for stuff that could be Googled. And these are not just from white folks or non-Black folks, they're from Black folks too. I know well from other social media in-groups and their posts that I was not the only person being bombarded by individuals and organizations. I hope that my edited volume will be such a resource that readers will seek first before asking another person of color for help before they're able to demonstrate in their ask their record of commitment to changing their learning behaviors and to confronting the oppressive systems with which they have been complicit in perpetuating and sustaining. For many of my now FFFs, and I call that former Facebook friends, I am the angry Black man because I'm impatient with police topologists and those more focused on property damage than the loss of human lives, and for declining for now this local interview request. With regards to the killing of George Floyd in protest, we'd like to talk to you about how communities can work together to create a lasting change. And also, if you're working on anything toward that end, if you could maybe share that as well. I have had to refocus my thinking and take deep breaths as I walk through my own neighborhoods with American flags proudly waving, where months ago, yard signs endorsed another candidate instead of the current US president. I also have to remind myself that my personal frustration, anger, grief, confusion, and disappointment come from not knowing the answer to this hard question of how do we achieve justice for all. As I move through these sort of roller coaster emotions and responses, I take solace in Audre Lorde's words about self-care and about self-preservation. She says, Black and third world people are expected to educate white people as to our humanity. Women are expected to educate men, lesbians and gay men are expected to educate the heterosexual world. The oppressors maintain their position and evade their responsibility for their own actions. There is a constant drain of energy, which might be better used in redefining ourselves and devising realistic scenarios for altering the present and constructing the future. And then what I love about this is that filmmaker Ava DuVernay echoes Lorde in her response to CBS News anchor Gayle King's question. So what action can white people do who see themselves as allies? And here's the response. That's not a question that people who are not white should answer. We take on the emotional labor of racism, and it is not our job to explain to white folks how to fix their broken selves in this context. There are many educated Caucasian folks who are talking to each other about it. They need to continue to do that so that we can save our energy for surviving and thriving. Now, while engagement in justice work is both life-giving and life-affirming, it is also life-draining. Indeed, my volume for me is equally a reprieve of sorts. My volume itself and the essays therein, ideally, are a step towards showing that social justice is not a hobby and it's not simply an intellectual exercise. For me, this work is my life. This intervention then is about the past, the present, and future, my own and yours. Part 2. As an editor of a volume on social justice, I certainly was expected to find a definition of social justice, and I found many. Social justice connotes both a process and a goal. The goal is full and equal participation of all groups in a society that is mutually shaped to meet the needs. The vision of such a society promotes A, an equitable distribution of resources, B, physical and psychological safety and security, C, self-determination and independent agency, D, a sense of self and responsibility to society as a whole. The vision of a socially just process includes practices and procedures that are democratic and participatory, inclusive and affirming of human capacities for working collaboratively and to create change. And another that is interesting is social justice is the view that everyone deserves equal economic, political, and social rights and opportunities. What I've come to see in this continual thinking about justice is the fact that justice is an ideal. Working toward justice is challenging ourselves to imagine what we have not experienced. Certainly, accountability is part of justice. Diversity alone is not justice. For whom is this just? The rich and the famous versus the poor, ordinary folks? Men versus women, schooled versus unschooled, Christians versus others, cisgender individuals versus transgender individuals, citizens versus those who are undocumented, old versus young, young versus old, and so on. And then again, there's Angela Y. Davis, who points out that I'm not suggesting that diversity cannot do good work, but it has to be combined with justice. Diversity without structural transformation simply brings those who were previously excluded into a system as racist, as misogynistic as it was before. And any and all justice work simply must be intersectional. As Reverend Roderick Dwayne Balin says in his call to action, social justice litany, the ills and the isms in this world threaten not only the quality but life itself for far too many oppressed people living under injustice and myriad forms of abuse. It is because of them that we must passionately obey, cry out, do not hold back, raise your voice like a trumpet. Justice as an ideal, further underlined here. It says, Ntozake Shange is a person that I lived and breathed as a new assistant professor. Her For Colored Girls Who Have Considered Suicide When the Rainbow Is Enough is probably how you recognize her. But here's the context of justice as I'm understanding it. She says, initially I was demonically ticked at the notion that I, Ntozake Shange, also known as Paulette Linda Williams, whose American birth certificate from an alleged Union State, New Jersey, read colored in 1948, was asked to write a piece about justice. This is truly laughable, since it is quite clear to me that justice as a fact, fantasy, or concept is so removed in actuality in my life, intellectual as well as visceral, that I thought maybe I should try my hand at a myth or my first science fiction. But the blues has not always made me or my people unhappy. You see, this idea is false. The general ideas roaming American minds, Black, white, Asian, Chicano, Texan, urban, empty of truth, whichever they are, about who and what I come from and what is just for us, are as scary as the bullet holes in Huey Long's assassination in Baton Rouge and as sad as the Trail of Tears, and I haven't gotten to Negro yet. We are essentially a generous people, not eager to chastise or exploit, but I can say right here and now that the absence of a day in honor of the end of slavery in this country is shameful, which to my mind makes it unjust, the opposite of justice. So my escape from what is clearly a continuous assault on all my sensibilities is to talk myself out of it, talk around the racism in English and Spanish and French, enough to create a world to sustain me. I found whatever I call that I can call justice by forever returning to the root of a language, the design of a plantation, the workings of a sugar mill, the chants of street corner b-boys, the words of those before me. I have to scrape the bottoms of souls, dreams, nightmares, and syllables to taste what justice might possibly be. So to define justice, to imagine justice, to rethink justice is to call out, call in, to identify what justice is not. Justice is not subscribing to the status quo. It is not accepting business as usual. It is not reading Robin DiAngelo, but not James Baldwin and Audre Lorde. Justice is acknowledging intersectional identities and the myriad ways in which power and privilege manifest in our and others' lives. It is acknowledging the interconnectedness of diversity and equality and humanity. It is the audacity to dream the impossible dream and to fight the unbeatable foe. And to love one's marginalized self in the face of social limitations, of actions, beliefs, and values. It is about acting and actions, not about performing allyship and wanting cookies when we have done what's right. It's not taking the high road when injustices are witnessed and not being addressed. Justice requires, again, taking risk, boldly taking a stand and letting others know where you stand. Justice is not just awareness. In fact, if you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor, said Desmond Tutu. And then Jeanette Sagan says, silence in the face of injustice is complicity with the oppressor. So I've witnessed since May 2020 that those who are allegedly aligned with justice movements and are doing the work can't and won't give ourselves full permission to imagine, to create and to act in ways that challenge the race, gender, status quo, class that is our American education system, our political and social systems. To disrupt the status quo is to interrupt all systems that support white supremacy, including religious institutions, faith-based institutions, higher education, government, healthcare, entertainment, sports, and the like. My life and my edited volume are an exercise and a commitment to imagine possibilities for discovery, for new connections, for new partnerships, new perspectives, and for new teaching and learning. It is also a disruption and a bold call out to disrupt these systems to which I have also contributed and benefited from. So back to Audre Lorde, who says these systems unconsciously or consciously, we are practicing. And I love this because it takes racial justice and it opens us up in these complex intersectional ways as I near the end. She says, in America, and we're talking to the US, this mythical norm is usually defined as white and thin and male and young and heterosexual, Christian and financially secure. It is with these mythical norms that the trappings of power reside in this society. Those of us who stand outside the power often identify one way in which we are different, and we assume that to be the primary cause of all oppression, forgetting other distortions around difference, some of which we ourselves may be practicing. And since May 2020, I am now naming white supremacy for what it is, refusing to perfume or Febreze it over its rancid odor. Because folks who look like me are dying, suffering, drowning, and gasping for air, I want people to do something about it. For those who are watching who are sad, I want to know why you're not outraged. Are you too angry? Are you angry enough to move beyond joining book clubs and attending lunch and learns and hiring a chief diversity officer, having potlucks and having listening sessions? As Niall Fort says, it's precisely because of my love for humanity that I get enraged at systems that prevent people from flourishing and being free. It's frustrating to see my righteous anger at unjust systems misinterpreted as hatred for individuals, but it's more frustrating to see the oppressed suffer while those maladjusted to injustice remain silent. I won't be silent. Silence is definitely violence. I see this sentiment summarized in the urgency and profound clarity of past, present, and future in the words of Toni Morrison. And it has profoundly contextualized what for all of us should be this whole notion of justice. I have wished that Jefferson had not used that phrase, the pursuit of happiness, as a third right, although I understand in the first draft, it was life, liberty, and the pursuit of property. Of course, I would have been one of those properties one had the right to pursue. So I suppose happiness is an ethical improvement over a life devoted to the acquisition of land, the acquisition of resources, the acquisition of slaves. Still, I would rather he had written life, liberty, and the pursuit of meaningfulness or integrity or truth. I know that happiness, she says to this graduating class in 2011 at Rutgers University, has been the real, if not covert, goal of your labors here. I know that it informs your choice of companions, the profession you will enter, but I urge you, please don't settle for happiness. It is not good enough. Of course you deserve it. But if that is all you have in mind, happiness, I want to suggest to you that personal success, devoid of meaningfulness, free of a steady commitment to social justice, that's more than a barren life. It's a trivial one. It's looking good instead of doing good. So as I close, I offer that this for me is an exercise, challenge, in the task of justice, to call out and address injustice without being unjust, to enact radical and revolutionary love for others and self-love in the face of conflict, suffering, and loss, and to persist in the face of disappointment, rejection, and unfairness. And as to measuring progress in this context of change, Dr. MLK situates it this way. He says, change does not roll in on the wheels of inevitability, but comes through continuous struggle. To rethink justice, then, is to question, to march on, to forge ahead, to practice humanity 101, compassion, empathy, forgiveness, integrity, kindness, respect, self-reflection, by extending it to others while holding each other and ourselves accountable.
Now we add a little something to it, just to encourage you. We're gonna take it to church later. Let's go! To all my brothers out there. To all my sisters in the struggle. Keep believing, sister, till the victory is won. Till that day. Hey. Let us march on. To victory. Till victory is won. Is won.
So finally, the task of justice work for me is knowing that at the end of the day, each and every day, I've brought some good to the world and have been better today than I was yesterday in my own actions, my own words, my own thoughts, my own deeds. In the spirit of being separate as the fingers, yet one as the hand in matters of social progress, a la Booker T. Washington, let all under the sound of my voice who are truly and deeply committed to doing, fighting for, and witnessing justice march on till victory is won. Thank you, Arizona Faith Network, for all that you do toward effecting justice and for including me in this portion of your annual meeting. Thank you.
Amen, amen, and amen. Thank you, Dr. Lester, for that very moving keynote, for being a part of our community, for being an advocate. And I encourage all of us that are in that space, in this space, to just breathe. Spend time with the words that you just heard. Spend time with the passion that you could hear and see. And ask yourself the question, if I care about that other person, what will happen to me? And if I don't care about that other person, what will happen to them? See which answer opens up to you, opens you up to God, for that is the path we must follow. Dr. Lester?
Thank you.
As we move on really quick, I just want to jump in and invite you to chat storm Dr. Lester, your appreciation, any other words you might want to lift up to him. That was amazing, Dr. Lester. I'm going to have to go back and listen to that multiple times to really soak it all in. We did record this, so you can do that. You can actually do it immediately if you go to our Facebook page after this. But we hold you in our hearts. And I think my computer's freezing. So I know you have to get to a lecture, but please take a moment to soak in all of these words of appreciation before you go.